day 4. So in the previous section, I'd been talking about how I'd written sort of like a test introduction to Sparkle, the screenplay I'm working on. And I often do that just to get it out of my system, write 5 or 10 pages just to get in the flow and then stop and then really map it out more and then begin again. And that's exactly what I did with Sparkle. I tossed out these 2 really actually wonderful opening sequences that I created and started with a whole new one because I figured I had to make it a little bit more, I don't know, legitimate and a little bit more melancholic at the beginning because it's becoming quite a comedy. It's really funny. It works, I think, very well as a comedy, but also there's a serious side to it. And so I thought I'll start serious and then make it a little more humorous and then weave in and out, hopefully, as the screenplay ensues. So again, so originally in the real version or the working version of the screenplay, I opened with an apple. And I think I say meet Annabelle. That's a different story, which I'll talk about later, how I came up with his name for an apple. But the bottom line is it's Mass introducing an apple, or his apple, special crossbreed of apple, to his students, where he's like a little chemistry teacher in 8th grade at a local school. And he introduces this apple and tells a story about it. And I realized, okay, it's funny, very funny scene, these school scenes that I have, but I wanted to make it a little more delving and have a little more impact. So I actually have that scene. It's scene number 2 now. Scene number 1 is sort of a historical recollection of Mass's early life and how he got into, or why he is where he is. Basically, it's with his grandfather. So it opens with a little boy who's Mass, probably 3 years old, and his grandfather, an elderly guy, in a beautiful apple orchard on these rolling hills of Denmark, down to Bay, actually right where we are. That's the scene. There's an old castle ruin out there. But in this opening sequence, he basically is playing with his grandpa, kind of like if you ever saw The Godfather. There's the famous scene, where Marlon Brando is running around with his grandson and he has a heart attack and dies. And not that I was basing on that, I was obviously inspired by it, but so it's similar in that this little boy is playing with his grandfather, but his grandfather, raises the flag and they're walking through this apple orchard, and then it shows him, I think, in maybe the wine cellar, because his grandfather was a failed winemaker. He really wanted to make grape wine, and there's no words. And actually this is all to music. It's all to Somewhere Over the Rainbow by Israel, the big Hawaiian dude's last name, I can't remember his name. That wonderful rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It opens, and all the footage is home movie footage. So it looks like kind of like a crackling home movie. And basically we follow Mass and his grandfather through like 3 or 4 stages of Mass's early life. 3 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old, and then grown up. And he's with his grandfather the whole time. Kind of like walking through this apple orchard. Each time you come back to Mass, he's a little bigger, and his grandfather's a tiny bit slower, a tiny bit older. And it ends with them looking out over the bay here, and eating an apple, because his grandfather's given him an apple, which is amazing, this Annabelle apple that he created. His grandfather created the apple, actually. That's part of the story. But they're looking out over the bay, and there's a seagull coming straight towards them, straight at the camera. And as Mass turns, you can see, Mass now has a beard. He's grown up. He looks down at the grave of his grandfather. So it begins, early in life, and then with Mass, and then as a grown-up, graveside overlooking the water with his now deceased grandfather. And he takes a bite of this apple, because again, the same scene right before, he's next to his grandfather, and then it cuts away to the seagull, actually, and you cut back and you don't realize you're in a graveyard now, and then the graveyard looks over the sea, and he takes the apple and he puts it down in front of his grandfather's graves. So that's how we know it's his grandfather. But I thought it was more poignant beginning. It actually works really well. I didn't really describe it maybe as well as I should have, but the bottom line is it begins with again, some visual background for what's about to happen, and the reason, the motivation for him to really want to succeed at making wine. Part of it's because, his grandfather had been such a special person in his life and had always really wanted to produce wonderful wine and never was able to crack it. And so it became sort of a lifelong obsession, or goal, I guess, or wish of Mass in the movie. And actually, I have no idea if his grandfather was really a winemaker in real life. I forgot to ask him that. But so that's one of the things I fictionalized. But actually, it works really well, and I actually showed it to Mass, and he really likes this beginning as well. And then it goes into this, meet Annabelle, where you see him working at his school.